Hello friends, Heidi here from Rain Country. God is good all the time, and I'm here today to talk about dehydrating apples and their many uses. So let's first talk obviously about the dehydrating process. Now I do recommend getting yourself a good apple slicer, core, and peeler. I actually don't use the peeling option on this because, well, partly because I can't find all the pieces. I took it apart one time and I think I lost a piece, but regardless, a lot of times I found it just as quick to go ahead and peel it by hand, and then I use my slicer and it makes it go fast. And the nice thing about that is that it slices them pretty thin, so it makes them perfect for dehydrating, or even using as is. I use this even when I'm using the fresh apples to make pies and crisps and so on. So if I can find the link to this one, I'll go ahead and link to it down below. But I know that in our local store, I've seen this very same apple peeler core in there, and it's only around $20. At least when I bought it, that's about what it is. I just recommend you get a good metal one. I think this is cast iron. It could be cast aluminum. I'm not sure. Patrick is the one that is better at telling the difference between that. And this one's called the Back to Basics brand. Just don't get a cheap plastic one because that's not going to last you very long. It's going to fall apart. Now this one has a suction on it, so I just get it wet, and then I do this a couple times to make sure it has a good hold on my countertop, and then that's what I use to at least slice and core the apples, and it does make that process go much faster. And then if you have your peeler on there, but by the way, the reason I took it off is because a lot of times I'd have these really wonky shaped apples, and sometimes the peeler just wouldn't get it all, and it was like I still have to go back and hand peel it. But with all the beautiful apples I got this year that have just this nice, wonderful, uniform shape, that's the first year we've got that many apples that are that perfect from our trees, and so I could have really used that peeler, but whatever, it doesn't matter. The hand peeling, I can do that pretty quickly anyway. So then what I do is, in this case, I have two methods of dehydrating. I'm either going to use my wood stove dehydrating rack that Patrick had built me out of old bed rails, and then we bought trays that look similar to this but are a finer mesh. We found it in the camping section of our local store where they have the smoking supplies, and so they're actually the racks to go in a smoker, and they're about, I think they're 13 to 13 and a half inches wide, and those work really good. So when Patrick built that rack, he built it to fit those particular trays. And if you're interested in building your own, because maybe you have a wood stove or some other heat source that you would like to use, then I'll link to that video he did several years ago down below, so you can see how he built it. Again, just using old bed rails. You can get them from the dump, clean them up, spray paint them, and then you got a nice little rack. So yeah, when I have fires going in the wood stove, I use that for dehydrating a lot. I actually have two of them in there that I use. But in this case, I've been using my Casoris because I have two of them, because I can just do so much more at a time than I can do in there on my wood stove, because I don't have near as much space to work with, because we use the top of the wood stove for so many other things as well. But we also, at the time I'm shooting this, have not had regular fires going yet. And so I'm trying to get these apples worked through. So anyway, as you can see, I've got a piece of cloth here. What this is an old cotton sheet that I tore into pieces to fit my trays. I've done the very same thing with my Nesco. So if you have a Nesco, you can do that. I prefer this over plastic or silicone when it comes to things that aren't drippy or are not a liquid, because it's going to dry faster, and then I'm not as concerned about turning the heat up to get them dry, especially not with plastic. If you're using plastic, you really don't want to go over 115 degrees. But apples you can dry at a higher heat than you can with herbs, and so I usually do 120 degrees with the apples, and then lay them out as evenly as possible onto the trays, and then it takes about 10 to 12 hours for them to get fully dry. That's usually a pretty good time frame for that temperature. You can turn them up a little higher, they're going to dry a little bit faster. Now on the wood stove, I don't remember how long it takes, and it's going to depend on it whether or not you're dehydrating on top of the wood stove, which can end up cooking the apples, just so you know, if you're not careful, or next to the wood stove. That's gonna decide the time frame it's gonna take to dehydrate. It might take, typically I find using my wood stove, in most cases, it takes about the same amount of time as when I'm running my dehydrator at about 115 to 120 degrees. So there's just a rough idea for you there. And then what you want to do is, just like I did in the dehydrating potatoes video that you would have seen about a month or so ago, I take the apples, I scrape them all off the trays onto my clean kitchen board here that Patrick made me. Then I let them fully cool down to room temperature. This is a very important step. Now, I just shot a video about dehydrating meat, and I think I forgot to explain the reason this is important is you never, no matter what it is, ever want to seal up any of your dried goods while they're still warm into anything. It doesn't matter if it's a Mylar bag or a jar or even a plastic bag. You do not want to seal them up while they're still warm, because what's going to happen is that's going to cause sweating inside the jar or the bag, and that is then going to cause your stuff to spoil inside of there. So it's very important they are down to completely cool down. And nice thing about using jars, just like I explained in that potato video, is that I thought my potatoes were all cooled down, but they weren't. I was just kind of touching the surface, but not really paying attention. Obviously, there was still some warmth in there, because when I checked on them the next morning, there was condensation built up inside the jar. So I had to dump them out, put them back on my dehydrator, and let them run for another hour or two to get fully dry again. Let them cool down fully. So you got to keep coming back and checking them. Then put them back in the jars and then vacuum seal. Okay, so that's going to be the best way to go about it, to make sure that they're going to have a shelf life for many years to come, by the way. And so what I'm going to show you, I just got these jar covers on here to make it look pretty, but I don't store them that way, and not with my jar covers. That's mostly for anything that's going to be on the counter for any period of time. So what I'm going to do is show you real quick how I vacuum seal, but I'll also be linking to a video down below on the many ways that you can vacuum seal various goods, including using the vacuum chamber that Patrick makes. The nice thing about the vacuum chamber is that you can use that to seal any jar that will fit inside there. So that means any recycled jars that have odd shaped tops that don't fit with a sealer like this that has either a wide or regular mouth that's only for canning jars. And I've used that many times for sealing up recycled green olive jars. So this one's already open, so I'm going to go ahead and vacuum seal this up and show you how I do it using the Food Saver top. You can also get an off-brand one. I just make sure, if you're looking for the off-brand one, I'll link to a set down below, but make sure you get it with the handle. It's so much easier to deal with than the one that doesn't have this little disc at the top. It's easier to pull off. And so you just press this down over your lid. I use the brake bleeder pump, but there's many other options, electric or manual, that you can use for vacuum sealing. This is still, for 7 years straight now, this has been my very favorite method. And it's lasted me for a very long time. No breaking down like the Food Savers and whatnot. And so you just lay that on the counter. Use your whole arm to pump with, not your hand like this. You're going to wear your hand out much quicker. Just rest it against the counter and make sure that that tip is just inserted firmly, and just pump until, well, you can just keep pumping until the needle stops moving. That's a really good indicator. I typically like to just let it go anywhere past the 400 or 15. I think I said 20 in the other video. 15 is the top number, or 400 is this bottom number. Somewhere past that is usually sufficient. You're not going to hurt anything by going further, because eventually that needle's going to stop moving and you won't be able to go any farther than that. Then at that point, you pull off the top, pick it up just a little bit by the lid, and that way you can check to make sure it has a seal. Put your band on. This will keep that lid in place in case it loses a seal. And then I recommend keeping anything you're going to vacuum seal, keep it out for at least a full day so you can check it to make sure the seal held, because if it's going to lose its seal, it's going to typically happen within the first 24 hours. And that could be anything that might be embedded in the lid. And I use, by the way, recycled metal lids, ones that I've already canned with. And no, Tetler lids won't work for this. They're great for canning, not great for vacuum sealing. So recycled metal lids of just about any brand. And anyway, there could be something wrong with the top of the jar. Like I have a couple of jars that have like some bumpy spots on it. There's just some defect in the glass and they do not vacuum seal. But if it comes unsealed, just double check everything. And then maybe you need to get a different lid or a different jar and start over. Or it even could be something simple as maybe maybe there was an apple kind of pressing up against the lid and that might have caused it to lose its seal. But the tighter you vacuum seal it, the less likely you're going to have an issue with that. So anyway, now let's talk about using the apples. And yes, these will keep for many years to come, many years. Don't believe the hype that, oh, dehydrated goods are only good for this and there's an expiration date. No. As long as your jar stays sealed, even if they come unsealed, they just might go stale. They're still going to be edible. As long as they're fully dry, it's not going to be an issue. So with the apples, just like this, or whatever shape you decide to dehydrate them in, you might want to cut them smaller than that. That's going to be entirely up to you and how you like to use them. But using them just like this, a lot of people assume that dehydrated apples are just for snacking. No, we almost never use them that way, ever. But they get used up quite a bit because as is, they have many uses. So it's just a matter of reconstituting or rehydrating them. And I have actually an old video of me making an apple pie using dehydrated apples. I've made fried apple pies using dehydrated apples, so I don't have a video on that. And I have a video out on how to make a pancake topping or waffle topping using the dehydrated apples. And so I'm going to be linking to all these in the description box down below. So don't forget to click on more or show more somewhere down here below the video screen. And then my most recent one is the one I did, it'd be about almost 2 years ago now, or a year and a half ago at least, on making a cherry apple crisp using the dehydrated apples. So here's the thing about that. Whenever you're using them to make a crisp or an apple pie or anything where you need to reconstitute the apples first, you can either soak them in water or cook them for a little bit on a low heat. It doesn't take long, and that can be water, or better yet, you can use juice for added flavor. So when I did the cherry apple crisp, I was using cherry juice to cook the apples in to rehydrate them in. So I did the same thing when I was making the fried apple pies, cook the apples in cherry juice, and oh my goodness, it makes such a delicious flavor. But any juice, you can use orange juice, you can use grape juice, you can use apple juice just to increase the apple flavor, raspberry juice, pineapple juice, mango juice, whatever suits your fancy. Use that. I mean, you can just do so many great things and get so many different flavors. So I do like to do that. So if I'm just, if we're kind of getting burnt out on cinnamon apple, like is the standard, then I can just use a fruit juice to cook the apples and rehydrate them in, and then just have a whole new flavor when I'm making the pies and crisps. And that just is a really nice option right there. So if you're already maybe putting up juice of your own from your own grapes and cherries and raspberries and blackberries and whatever it is, then that's also an option right there. Like I showed in that crisp video, I just put them in a pan with some juice. I make sure they're fully covered is all. You don't want to overdo it. You don't want to put so much juice that they're just swimming in there. You want them just make sure they're fully covered with the juice or the water if you don't want to use juice, and then just cook them for a few minutes until they're soft. And then you're ready to put them in your pie, your crisp, or make your topping, your apple spice topping, whatever it is you want to make out of those apples. The other option that you can do, even still using that same method, rehydrating them in either water or juice, is just keep cooking them down, and you can turn them either into an apple sauce or an apple butter using that. So obviously, if you're going to make apple butter, usually you're going to add sugar to that, but you can do that same thing because they're going to cook soft enough. You can then take a stick blender to blend them up so they have a nice smooth texture, if that's how you want to do it. And then some other options would be, if your apples aren't super sugary, super sweet, Like sometimes our apples can be pretty tart and not have a real high sugar content. Some of those can actually powder up pretty well. It just is going to depend on the apple, so no promises there. And also some apples tend to be more dense. The more dense the apple is, the less likely it is going to be easy to powder up. A lot of times your dried apples will stay pretty flexible, so they might not powder up well. But if you can actually snap them, they will powder up very well. And in that case, you can use that powder as is and add it directly to things like oatmeal, breads of any kind, muffins, cookies. Just add it right in there with all your other ingredients, especially if you're adding any liquid ingredients, which typically you are. You may need to add just a little bit more liquid to make up for the added dry ingredient that's going in there, because it will absorb some of that liquid. But yes, you can use it just like that. I do that. I actually have apples I was able to powder up because they were crispy enough for me to do so. And I use that when I cook some mornings when I'm making oatmeal for Patrick, and I do try to mix it up. Sometimes I'll use the dried pumpkin powder I make from my own pumpkins, and sometimes I use the dried apple powder and then add whatever spices I want to that, and then cook them up some oatmeal. It's just another way to add a little flair to the oatmeal, you know, especially if you're wanting to eat it quite a bit during the week, or you know, you can just make it a little bit different every time. And then a couple other options that you can use your dried apples for is, yes, you can make vinegar out of dried apples. You can also even make a fermentation starter out of your dried apples, because I make fermentation starters out of anything, fresh or dried. It can be a fruit, a vegetable, or an herb. As long as you have clean water and sugar, you can make a fermentation starter that you can use to make kimchi, wine, mead, any fermented good you want. And so I've used dried goods for that. I've used apples before to make it, but I haven't used dried apples, but I would if that's what I had on hand, because I've used dried rhubarb to make a starter, and I've used dried rhubarb to make a vinegar. It's easy. You're just not going to put as much in of the dried products when you're making the vinegar or the starter as you would if you were using fresh, because obviously the fresh are already full of liquid, whereas the dehydrated items are going to absorb some of the water in there and fill that jar up. Let's say you're making a half-gallon jar of apple vinegar, like I've got going back here, which is finally getting to where it's almost done. It's taken forever for this batch. Instead of filling your jar all the way up with pieces like this, if you're using the dried, only fill it up to about here, because that's all you're going to need for making a good apple vinegar when it comes to using dried fruits. And that will apply to any dried goods. In fact, I have a video I did this past February as part of the Fermented February collaboration on making a vinegar that I like to use as a hair wash using dehydrated nasturtiums. And what else did I use? Dehydrated sage and dehydrated rosemary, I think. So yeah, you can make vinegar, you can ferment anything as dehydrated. And if you like an apple cider vinegar, you can use the dried apples. If you're like me and you've got a ton that you're putting up right now, just from this year alone, I have 16 jars of apples. And right as soon as I'm done shooting this video, I'm going to start cutting up more apples and get more jars filled up, because I have a lot coming in. And I want to make sure that I preserve as many as I can, even though I've been giving a lot away too. And you can even use this, let's say you're making a mead. A mead is a honey wine. So you can use these dried apples to flavor your mead. So you're already doing the honey in the water, you're adding your fermentation starter, and then you can take a handful of dried apples and then drop them down into that jug. You might want to cut them up smaller, though. It'll make them easier to get out of the jug when you're done fermenting. Just drop them down in the jug with maybe a cinnamon stick and a couple of cloves if you want, a little nutmeg, and then you'll have a nice apple spice mead. So your honey wine. And if you're interested in learning more about making wine or mead, I have a full playlist that includes all of that. I'll be putting in the description box down below that you can check out. And if you're on Rumble, please understand I just copy and paste over to Rumble. But when it comes to playlists, I have no other choice because Rumble doesn't yet have the option to make playlists. So either way, even if I took the extra time to gather up the links from Rumble of the videos that are available on Rumble, which not all of them are, in order to link it to a playlist, I'd still have to link it to YouTube. So just so you understand how that works. If you're on Rumble and you really don't want to go to YouTube, you can always do a search for any of my videos that might be on Rumble by simply at the top, you put Rain Country Homestead, all one word, since that's the channel name, and then put the topic that you want to look for. So it could be wine, mead. I don't think I have any of those on Rumble, but if it's hair, natural hair care, natural skin care, whatever it is, I have on dehydrating, potatoes, and whatever. That's just how you can find it. And it should take you right to the top. Making sure you put the full channel name in there is going to be important to be able to bring it up to the top of the search results. So I think I covered everything I was going to cover about the dehydrating the apples and the ways that you can use them. So what I'd like from you guys, I know a lot of you are already doing this stuff and you probably already have all your own ideas of how you like to use your dried apples, or maybe even the shape you like to cut them in for dehydrating for their various purposes. Please share with us in comments down below so people can learn from you as well. And thanks for watching. Take care and God bless.